The tranquil town of Havenwood, nestled amidst rolling hills and quiet streets, prided itself on its community values, its tight-knit neighborhoods, and above all, its esteemed educational system. It was a place where teachers were not just instructors but pillars, shaping young minds and upholding moral standards. Among them, Anna Hayes shone brightest. A history teacher at Havenwood High, Ms. Hayes was lauded for her passionate lessons, her genuine care for her students, and an almost magnetic charisma that drew everyone to her. She was charismatic, articulate, and deeply respected, a figure of aspiration for many, a confidant for others. Her classroom was a sanctuary, a vibrant hub where history came alive, and students felt truly seen. No one in Havenwood could have ever imagined the insidious darkness festering beneath this pristine surface, a darkness that would ultimately consume Ms. Hayes and shatter the town's perception of innocence. The story began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A parent, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, initially dismissed it as adolescent gossip, a fleeting rumor among students on social media. Her son, Ethan Miller, a bright but introverted junior, had become withdrawn, his once sparkling curiosity dimming into a brooding silence. Ethan, known for his quiet demeanor and dedication to his studies, particularly history, had always spoken highly of Ms. Hayes. Too highly, perhaps, for a typical student-teacher relationship. The initial whispers suggested a peculiar closeness, an unspoken intimacy that transcended the professional boundaries. But Mrs. Vance, like many, trusted Anna Hayes implicitly. She was a professional, a role model. The idea felt preposterous, a cruel jab at a dedicated educator. Yet, the whispers grew louder, bolder. They morphed from vague innuendo into concrete observations. Ms. Hayes staying unusually late after school with Ethan, private text messages exchanged at odd hours, an almost possessive protectiveness Ms. Hayes displayed towards him in class. These weren't mere observations. They were subtle, unsettling cracks in the polished veneer of a perfect teacher. Mrs. Vance's initial denial began to falter, replaced by a cold dread that tightened its grip around her heart. A mother's intuition, a primal warning signal, screamed louder than any rational explanation. Then came the first undeniable shift, a moment that tore through Havenwood's placid facade. It was not a grand public exposé, but a quiet, agonizing confrontation in the principal's office. When confronted by Principal Thompson with evidence of inappropriate late-night calls and text messages, Anna Hayes' composure, usually so unshakable, fractured. Her eyes, typically warm and engaging, darted nervously. Her eloquent speech faltered. She denied everything vehemently, painting herself as a victim of a malicious student's infatuation, a misunderstanding born of her dedication. She accused Ethan of making up stories, of being an emotionally unstable teenager seeking attention. It was a desperate, calculated maneuver designed to deflect and discredit. But the principal, though initially sympathetic, sensed the tremor beneath her practiced indignation. The sheer volume and nature of the digital communications, coupled with Ethan's increasingly distressed state, were too significant to ignore. The school administration, facing a potentially explosive scandal, had no choice but to involve the authorities. What started as an internal school matter quickly escalated, spiraling beyond anyone's control, dragging Ms. Hayes from her pedestal into the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The community was left reeling, caught between loyalty to a beloved teacher and the horrifying possibility of a profound betrayal. The arrest of Anna Hayes was a seismic event that shook Havenwood to its core. The local news channels, usually preoccupied with high school football scores and town council meetings, suddenly focused their cameras on the familiar brick facade of Havenwood High. A teacher, charged with multiple counts of sexual misconduct with a minor. The headline alone was enough to ignite a firestorm of outrage and disbelief. Parents whispered in hushed tones, students exchanged shocked glances, and colleagues struggled to reconcile the image of the compassionate educator with the mugshot splashed across every screen. The betrayal felt personal, a stain on the very fabric of their trusted community. The preliminary hearing was packed, a crucible of public emotion. Mrs. Hayes, clad in a conservative suit, her face pale but defiant, sat next to her formidable defense attorney, Mr. Richard Maxwell. He was a shark in tailored suits, known for his aggressive tactics and uncanny ability to dismantle a witness on the stand. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Sarah Jenkins, was equally resolute, her demeanor sharp, her voice devoid of emotion as she laid out the initial charges. The air in the small courtroom crackled with unspoken tension, a palpable sense of anticipation as the first layers of the sordid affair were peeled back. DA Jenkins began by presenting the digital evidence, a meticulous timeline of text messages, late-night calls, and social media interactions. Each ping, each timestamp, was a silent hammer blow against Ms. Hayes's carefully constructed image. The content of these messages, initially seemingly innocuous, gradually evolved into something far more intimate, more suggestive, more controlling. "Thinking of you, Ethan." A message read at 2 a.m. "Don't tell anyone about our special connection," another warned. They painted a chilling portrait of a teacher actively cultivating an inappropriate relationship, eroding boundaries one carefully chosen word at a time. The prosecution argued these were not innocent interactions, but a deliberate grooming process, exploiting Ethan's vulnerability and his admiration for his teacher. The defense, however, immediately sought to discredit the evidence and, more critically, the alleged victim. Mr. Maxwell portrayed Ethan Miller as a troubled, attention-seeking teenager, prone to exaggerating and fabricating stories. He suggested that Ethan, suffering from undisclosed emotional issues, had developed an unhealthy obsession with his teacher and had misinterpreted her kindness as something more. "My client, Ms. Hayes, is a dedicated educator who has always gone above and beyond for her students," Maxwell boomed, his voice resonating through the courtroom. "She offered guidance, mentorship, nothing more." This young man's vivid imagination, perhaps fueled by adolescent angst, has tragically misconstrued her genuine care into something nefarious. It was a classic defense tactic: attack the victim's credibility, sow doubt, and shift the narrative. But the real emotional weight of the proceedings fell upon Ethan Miller when he finally took the stand. His appearance was a stark contrast to the confident, smiling student from old yearbooks. He was visibly thinner, his eyes hollow, his shoulders hunched, carrying a burden far too heavy for a 17-year-old. The prosecutor led him gently, drawing out the painful details piece by agonizing piece. Ethan spoke in a hushed, trembling voice, recounting how Ms. Hayes had singled him out, praising his intelligence, his sensitivity, making him feel special, unlike any other teacher. He described how her attention had initially felt validating, intoxicating even, a balm for his quiet insecurities. Then, the narrative took a darker turn. He spoke of the special projects after school, the seemingly innocent coffees that extended late into the evening, the emotional dependence that Ms. Hayes had fostered. He detailed the private conversations, the intimate disclosures she encouraged, blurring the lines between mentor and confidant, until he no longer knew where the professional relationship ended and something else began. The initial praise had morphed into emotional manipulation, the perceived intimacy into a coercive control. He described how Ms. Hayes had explicitly warned him against speaking to others, telling him their bond was unique and not something others would understand. "She told me. She loved me." Ethan choked out, his voice cracking. "She said I was the only one who truly understood her." A collective murmur swept through the courtroom, quickly silenced by Judge Thompson's sharp gavel. Anna Hayes, at the defense table, remained stoic, but a barely perceptible flush crept across her neck. The jury, a diverse group of Havenwood citizens, watched Ethan intently, their faces a mixture of sympathy and growing horror. They were ordinary people, parents and grandparents, who had sent their own children to schools, trusting the very institutions that were now under scrutiny. Ethan's vulnerability, his raw pain, was a powerful, unspoken testimony that transcended the legal jargon. It tapped into a primal fear every parent harbors: the betrayal of trust by those who are supposed to protect. During cross-examination, Mr. Maxwell unleashed his full arsenal. He grilled Ethan relentlessly, questioning his motives, his memory, his emotional stability. "Isn't it true, Mr. Miller, that you were struggling with your grades before Ms. Hayes became your history teacher?" Maxwell pressed, his voice sharp as a surgical blade. "Isn't it true you developed an unhealthy infatuation with her, perhaps fueled by a desire for attention?" He suggested Ethan was fabricating details, twisting events, driven by a desire for revenge or notoriety. He highlighted inconsistencies in Ethan's recollection of dates, subtle variations in his statements to different investigators, attempting to portray him as unreliable, a disturbed teenager with an agenda. Ethan, under the relentless barrage, began to crumble. His voice grew weaker, his answers more hesitant. He stumbled over words, his eyes darting towards Ms. Hayes, who met his gaze with an unreadable, almost cold expression. The psychological pressure in the courtroom was suffocating. Every breath felt heavy, every silence stretched to an unbearable length. The defense attorney's strategy was brutal but effective: plant seeds of doubt, no matter how small, to undermine the emotional resonance of Ethan's testimony. Could this really be a manipulative teenager seeking to destroy a good woman's life? The question hung heavy in the air, a poisonous fog blurring the lines of truth. Yet, just as doubt threatened to take root, D.A. Jenkins brought forward another crucial piece of evidence, a game-changer that slammed the door shut on the defense's narrative of a deluded teenager. It was a digital forensics report detailing the recovery of deleted messages from Ms. Hayes' personal phone and laptop, devices she had claimed were wiped clean. The prosecution projected the messages onto the large screen, one by devastating one. These were not just suggestive texts, they were explicit declarations of affection, carefully crafted instructions to keep their secret, and even thinly veiled threats about the consequences if Ethan ever spoke out. "Remember, Ethan," one message read, dated months before the accusation surfaced. "Our bond is special. No one else needs to know our little world. It would crush me, and it would change everything for you too." Another, more chilling, stated, "Don't disappoint me. You know how much I care about your future. Let's not jeopardize it." The messages were undeniable proof of a calculated campaign of emotional manipulation and coercion, not simply a misunderstanding. The words, projected in stark white text on the screen, were a public unveiling of the private psychological battlefield Ms. Hayes had created. The atmosphere in the courtroom transformed instantly. A collective gasp, louder and more visceral than any previous murmur, rippled through the gallery. Some jurors leaned forward, their eyes wide with shock. Others recoiled, their faces etched with disbelief. Anna Hayes, for the first time, visibly flinched. Her carefully maintained stoicism shattered. Her jaw tightened, her face drained of all color, revealing a flicker of raw panic in her eyes. Mr. Maxwell, despite his formidable experience, looked genuinely blindsided, his confident posture momentarily sagging as he stared at the damning evidence. The air, already thick with tension, now thrummed with a new, inescapable certainty. The narrative had irrevocably shifted. The defense's carefully constructed wall of denial had just collapsed. Judge Thompson, a stern and experienced jurist known for his piercing intellect and unwavering commitment to justice, fixed his gaze upon Anna Hayes. It was a look that spoke volumes, a silent judgment that transcended the ongoing legal proceedings. His expression, usually impassive, now held a deep, unyielding disappointment, a cold fury at the abuse of power. The judge's silent reaction was more potent than any verbal reprimand, amplifying the gravity of the revelation. It was the moment everyone in that courtroom understood. The truth, in its brutal, unvarnished form, had finally been laid bare. The subsequent cross-examination of Ms. Hayes herself became a masterclass in psychological interrogation. D.A. Jenkins systematically dismantled her previous denials, using her own words against her. Ms. Hayes, You stated under oath that these communications were merely a student misinterpreting your professional guidance. Do these recovered messages, with their explicit emotional overtures and veiled threats, still align with your definition of professional guidance? Jenkins' voice was calm, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Anna Hayes, now visibly shaken, struggled to maintain her composure. Her answers became evasive, contradictory. She stammered, she deflected, attempting to reinterpret the messages, to claim they were taken out of context, that she was merely trying to help a fragile student. But her voice trembled, her hands fidgeted, betraying the practiced facade she had worn for so long. The confident, articulate teacher was gone, replaced by a desperate woman cornered by her own deceit. The jury watched her emotional collapse in real time, witnessing the raw, ugly truth emerge from beneath layers of denial. Her carefully constructed persona, built on years of trust and respect, was crumbling before their eyes, exposed as a sham. The public reaction was immediate and ferocious. Social media exploded with outrage, demanding justice. Local newspapers, once hesitant, now printed scathing editorials condemning Ms. Hayes' actions. The betrayal was magnified by her position, the inherent trust placed in educators. Parents across Havenwood looked at their own children, then at their schools, with a newfound, chilling suspicion. The case became a symbol, a cautionary tale, igniting a broader conversation about power dynamics in education and the insidious nature of grooming. The weight of public opinion, though not admissible in court, pressed down on every participant, a constant reminder of the profound impact of this case far beyond the courtroom walls. The defense attorney, Mr. Maxwell, despite his earlier aggression, now seemed to be fighting a losing battle, attempting to salvage what little credibility remained for his client. He argued for leniency, citing Ms. Hayes' previous exemplary record, her contributions to the community, suggesting a moment of grave misjudgment rather than malicious intent. He painted a picture of a lonely, overburdened teacher who perhaps formed an inappropriate emotional bond, but one that was fueled by a misguided sense of care, not predatory malice. But the recovered messages, stark and undeniable, had already sealed her fate in the hearts and minds of many. The prosecution's closing argument was a powerful, emotionally charged summary, weaving together every piece of evidence, every witness testimony, into an irrefutable narrative of abuse of power and profound betrayal. D.A. Jenkins focused not just on the legal technicalities, but on the profound psychological damage inflicted upon Ethan Miller, a young man whose innocence was stolen, whose trust was shattered by the very person entrusted with his care. She spoke of the sacred duty of teachers, the vulnerability of students, and the chilling ease with which manipulation can masquerade as care. Anna Hayes did not just cross a line, Jenkins declared, her voice ringing with conviction. She obliterated it. She exploited a young, impressionable boy, not for love, but for control. This courtroom, this community, demands justice for Ethan Miller, and for every student whose trust is jeopardized by those who betray their sacred duty. The tension in the courtroom during the jury's deliberation was unbearable. Every minute felt like an hour. Every cough in the gallery echoed like thunder. The community held its breath, waiting for the verdict that would define not just Anna Hayes' future, but the moral compass of Havenwood itself. The faces of the jurors, when they finally returned, were grim, resolute. No one dared to breathe as the foreman stood, clutching the verdict slip, his voice steady but solemn as he delivered the fateful words. The judge's gaze swept over the silent courtroom, then landed squarely on Anna Hayes. Her face was ashen, her eyes fixed on the foreman, devoid of their former defiance, now filled with a stark, terrifying resignation. The verdict was not just a legal pronouncement, it was a societal judgment, a thunderous declaration that some lines, once crossed, leave an indelible scar, and some betrayals, once uncovered, can never be forgiven. The silence that followed the foreman's words was deafening, a vacuum in which only the heavy truth remained. It was the moment everything truly fell apart, not just for Anna Hayes, but for the idealized image of trust and innocence that Havenwood had cherished for so long. The legal system had delivered its judgment, but the emotional and psychological fallout would ripple through the lives of many for years to come.